In Washington, however, although I agree with Bill and Mike, at least for a period, there will be a large attempt at bipartisanship. But among Democrats, there's going to be enormous bitterness, Monday morning quarterbacking, and great recriminations about the Gore campaign, saying he should have used Bill Clinton more. He should have boasted about the economy more. He should have done better in the debates. He should have run as a new Democrat rather than a traditional liberal Democrat.
Yeah, I think you're right, Fred, but I must say, I mean, I think that one of the things that is clear, and that is that as the race tightened, Gore made a great rush at the end and came, as the vote here shows, very close indeed to pulling this out. And if he is able to hang on to a couple of these late states, I mean, this will be the closest election we've seen one of the closest elections we've seen in a long time. What you're seeing there on your screen is the stage down there in Austin as an entertainer there singing America the Beautiful to warm up the crowd. Now, we expect to hear within the next about 15 to 20 minutes from Vice President Gore and then from Governor Bush. It is not at all clear. We don't know yet whether any calls have been made from Mr. Gore to Mr. Bush. We don't know exactly what Mr. Gore is going to say, although that may be able to be inferred from the fact that he has sent a team to Florida to demand a recount, which is, it strikes me under the circumstances, is understandable, although perhaps doomed. You know, this is an option, by the way, that was faced by Richard Nixon in 1960 when there were very serious questions raised about the legitimacy of ballots, especially in the state of Illinois, and he made the decision because of the atmosphere of divisiveness that he said that it would create not to force the matter and to demand a recount. So it'll be interesting to see if Mr. Gore, how strongly he follows through. Let's bring in Juan Williams. Juan, your thoughts?
Well, I tell you what, Britt, I think short of war or some major domestic crisis, I think there's going to be a lot of bitterness and divisiveness in Washington. Earlier in the evening, we were talking about the lack of a dominant theme in terms of something that would make the American people react one way or another in this race. I think that now, if you look at the divided government that's going to exist in Washington, we talked about the Democrats gaining in the Senate, Republicans gaining a little bit in the House, but still not enough so that you can have a clear majority that could engender leadership and form an agenda. And with Bush in this position now, with people sensing that, gee, his brother is the governor of the state that put him over, and they're going to question the legitimacy of that, I think you're going to just see an incredible amount of bickering. There's going to be a lot of sweetness and light on top of people calling for America to come together. But when it comes down to the business of getting American government done, I think you're going to just see a lot of recrimination and anger.
Now, I remember when, in covering President George Bush, he did not have and did not promise a major domestic agenda. And I can remember I was working for ABC News at the time, and that was to the consternation of some of the figures there, and they wanted me at one time or another to do a tough piece, a tough series about how Bush isn't doing anything. And I remember reminding them, well, he didn't promise to do very much. In fact, he promised a pretty tame domestic agenda. That seemed to be what he thought his voters wanted. That's not the case here so much with George W. Bush. He has promised, he's made some pretty ambitious promises. We're talking about a kind of a bold plan for Social Security, very controversial, detested by many Democrats.
Educational reform.
Education reform and a major tax cut.
Sure. Even a tax cut that the leadership of his own party at certain points of the campaign have walked away from, at least the
truth is that the educational reform provisions are easily compromised on. I think Michael is right. There will be a bipartisan education package early in the next Congress. I think the tax cut can be compromised on. Presidents aren't in control, you know. There are foreign policy crises. The economy could slow down. And I suspect that we don't know what we'll be talking about in February of 2001, but it won't be what we now think it's going to be.
Can we add one? Yeah.
I'm just going to say,
find more electoral votes into the mix here.
Yeah, adding further to the animation or the energy for Gore to challenge this is he gets 5 more electoral votes now. We project the state of New Mexico goes to him. That would push him up presumably to what I guess it already has, 271, 248. 99% of the precincts in there. Gore wins New Mexico. No great surprise there, although the Bush people had hoped to win that state. Let's turn to Tony Snow for his thoughts. Tony?
Well, Britt, what you're going to see now is kind of a coalition government. First, we probably ought to congratulate the people in Austin on their choice of cable outlets. And the next thing we ought to do is talk a little bit about the challenges George W. Bush faces. Now, we asked Americans if they wanted government by the same party or they want a divided government. And if we can get back to me and our slates, we'll demonstrate to you that people actually wanted government by the same party by a margin of 53% to 40%. That flies in the face of conventional wisdom, where people have said in recent years that Americans like divided government. Turns out not to have been true this year. Also, which issues are most important? Well, let me just read off a couple of. On the environment, if you're trading off the environment versus the economy, it's almost an even trade. There you have it. By economy, we're really talking about economic growth. When you have a conflict between the two, which one wins? The economy by 1 point. Now you can see Democrats and Republicans have very different views on the matter, but it's clear that there is really, this is where a president's going to have to use his bully pulpit. The same thing about whether you invest in the stock market as part of Social Security. Let's take a look at the numbers there. 57% of respondents support investing Social Security taxes in the stock market. Now, that's something Al Gore strenuously opposed, but it looks like George W. Bush may have a working margin here to try to do something very significant with Social Security. That is always a challenge for any president. Even the fabled Ronald Reagan touched that third rail in 1981, and it almost scuttled his presidency for a little while. Finally, do you help seniors pay for their medicine? Well, most people thought that's a pretty good idea. Through Medicare, 57%, through private insurance, 36%. You put it all together, Brit, George W. Bush has outlined a domestic agenda much different than Al Gore's, but he has also talked about the importance of working together with Democrats. He's going to have to do that. And one of the things that we've seen in recent presidents, whether it be Bill Clinton or Ronald Reagan, is that you have to use the bully pulpit of your office if you're going to try to make a difference in policy. That is the challenge now facing President-elect George W. Bush.
All right, Tony Snow, thank you very much.
Should we do a little review of the electoral map? We now know
why
that
don't we
George
take
Bush
a look
has
at
taken
well, let's look
30
at
states.
that's the scene down there in Austin. Let's look in on that scene down there and just listen for a second.
Still appears to be
Carl
raining.
Cameron, are you there, buddy? Oh, Carl's out making calls. That guy's a congenital reporter. But we're waiting to see whether we're expecting to hear from Vice President Gore shortly, and we're expecting also to hear thereafter from Governor Bush. There you see the scene on the happy streets. There, a line of state troopers in their yellow rain slickers lined up in front of the platform where it is believed Governor Bush will soon appear. He apparently waiting for Mr. Gore to speak first. Let's take a look at the electoral map, Paul, as you suggested.
Yeah, we now know that Governor Bush has won 30 states, bringing his electoral count up to 271. Vice President Gore winning 19 states, including the District of Columbia. His count now up to 248, including that the five electoral votes from New Mexico that we just tabulated. One of the things I wanted to revisit with our panel here, you were talking about the second guessing probably has already begun. Questions about the Gore strategy. One of the most common criticisms I have heard in the last week is that the vice president had a very diffuse message. One day it was the environment, one day it was Social Security, one day it was George W. Bush as a dummy. The next day, you know, his tax cut is too deep. Do you agree with that analysis?
Look, you know, one of the great sports in American politics is savaging the campaign that loses, even if they lose by, by one state and by half a percentage point in the popular vote. I would just say this, Gore, through no actions of his own, was behind 10 to 15 points when this campaign began, really because Clinton had been impeached and people wanted to change. He scrambled all the way back to losing by 1 point. He's not the greatest candidate in the world. Maybe the campaign made some mistakes, but in a certain way, I suspect historians and political scientists will study this campaign, not the candidate, but the campaign. It's a pretty effective campaign, very disciplined, very methodical, an electoral college strategy. They went into Florida early. And often, and they almost picked it off. And, they did this 4 or 5 months ago when no one thought it was possible. So I don't know. It's a pure campaign. I suspect political scientists will think the Gore campaign in terms of targeting resources, advertising buys. Fred is right. They didn't waste much money, I don't think, in states that turned out to be hopeless. Pretty effective campaign. They just fell short.
Just wanted to remind, what you see on your screen is the rather different scene in Nashville. You see the faces there of people who are obviously cared enough about Al Gore to stand out in the street or wherever they are there at the War Memorial until the wee hours of the morning waiting to hear from their man. This must be for Vice President Gore, as exhausted as he is, as hard as he fought, as long as he fought, with an energy that he managed to project through a hoarse voice. This must be very difficult and very painful for him and his family indeed. They came so very close to doing what not very long ago looked, as you point out, Bill Kristol, like the undoable.
And it's the first general election that Al Gore has ever lost.
That's right, it is the first.
He ran in the primaries in '88, but he's won every general election. He's been in at every level, and it must be tough.
Yeah, let's go back now, if we can, to Austin and hear what Carl Cameron can tell us about what we expect to hear from Governor Bush and perhaps when.
Well, we expect to hear from Governor Bush actually in just a matter of minutes. He will wait for the Vice President to finish his remarks from Nashville, and then the President-elect, by projection, will be coming forth from the governor's mansion to the main podium here in the streets of Austin. As soon as Fox News projected the governor to be the president, his headquarters just emptied out, and they have all now gone to the front of the stage, a reserved portion of the streets for staff. And some Bush aides have informed us that the governor will include in his remarks an overture of bipartisanship to Democrats. He has, on the stump and throughout his career as governor of Texas, talked about his first victory when he called then Lieutenant Governor of Texas Bob Bullock, a long-standing partisan Democrat, and made an overture of friendship and bipartisanship that served him well during Lieutenant Governor Bullock's life. When the Lieutenant Governor died, Bush actually gave the eulogy. There will be an overture of bipartisanship to Democrats in his victory speech. In addition, the governor will talk about his father, the former President Bush, who is in the mansion with the Bush family as they watch the returns. This, of course, historic. We haven't had a father-son election since John Adams and John Quincy Adams. And they will also talk a little bit about the 5 points that have been Governor Bush's primary agenda. Reforming education, he said, would be the first bill that he sends to Congress. They've talked about his desire to reform Social Security and Medicare, his desire to rebuild the military. All of these issues will come out, and of course, tax cuts. The governor has said a victory even by a point would constitute a mandate that would justify his pushing hard for a large across-the-board tax cut, $1.3 trillion. Clearly, this is such a narrow win, it is hard to envision the pundits calling it a mandate. Certainly, the shift in the Congress is not large enough to make that an argument that may seem to have legs, but the Bush campaign believing a win is a win. So when he talks about the 5 points that have been his agenda, he will say that he now has the people's backing and he should be able to get it through Congress. Brit, Paula.
All right, Carl. We'll be watching for you. Good job down there on a long night. I hope you're able to get warm before all this is all over. Look forward to seeing you back in Washington, and soon.
You know, one irony, Brit. Many Republicans thought Ross Perot cost President Bush the presidency in 1992. I'm not sure that's true, but he certainly damaged President Bush. Some Democrats will feel that Ralph Nader cost Al Gore the presidency in 2000 against President Bush's son.
Okay, let's take a look at the balance of power as it stands now in the Senate. We are projecting 50 Republicans, 48 Democrats, 2 races outstanding. The race in Nebraska and the race in Michigan, where Debbie Stabenow has made such a comeback against incumbent Senator Spence Abraham, who was once very far ahead indeed. But that appears at this stage, it appears now that Joe Lieberman will be back in the Senate and not presiding over it. And that job would appear to go to Dick Cheney. And if it stays this close, he'll have to be down there a lot more than he might actually have planned to break possible ties. So there you see the situation in the U.S. Senate. We got 2 races still to go. Possible pickup of one more switch, I guess, if Stabenow wins. And the Democrat holds, we get to 50-50, and Cheney provides the Cheney would provide the balance that would allow the Republicans to organize the Senate, have the committee chairman, and to whatever extent they could run the place.
All right, we're going to take the opportunity now to go back to Jim Angle. We've given him a little time to make some phone calls. He rejoins us from Gore headquarters in Nashville. Jim?
Hello, Paula. Well, we're expecting Vice President Gore here shortly, perhaps in the next 15 minutes. It is not clear what Gore is going to say, whether or not he will concede. As you know, they're looking at a recount in Florida. So if they are contemplating a recount in Florida, then it would be somewhat unseemly to make a concession speech. So he's coming here. We don't know we don't know exactly what. There are other Democratic senators we've seen coming in here, so the crowd is gathering. Some of the dignitaries are coming in. We just don't know what it is that Gore will be saying.
All right, Jim, thank you very much for that update, and we'll come back to you as soon as there's any indication of what the Vice President may be saying and when he might be saying that.
That's fascinating. Now let's war game that out a little bit. You're Gore. He probably doesn't smell a rat in terms of fraud in the state of Florida. Although you got your rival's governor running the state, presumably the apparatus of the whatever the state election board is. Although I don't think that's controlling. He may think it's so close that it'd be interesting if he comes out tonight and refuses to concede. However, it seems to me that we've got suspense again, don't we?
Well, Britt, he can congratulate George W. Bush for a fine showing and recognize that the race has been called, at least by Fox and others, without conceding and saying that, and I think he has a perfectly reasonable case to say, I want to wait and see what the final outcome is after the recount in Florida. It is so close, and he can be perfectly friendly about it and not bitter, but he doesn't really have to concede.
And we have been told we may have to wait a little longer for the Vice President's remarks. He apparently has not left the hotel yet to join his supporters at headquarters. Go ahead, Mark.
No, I mean, it's a projected win. I mean, at the very least, he might want to wait for the votes to actually be counted before he formally and officially concedes. But yeah, I agree with Fred. He can be gracious about it, and that's certainly what he would want to be in this situation.
And given that, then what does the governor of Texas do?
Well, with our calling of New Mexico, it is now the case that if Florida were recounted and went the other way, Al Gore would
Bo Derek on the street down there, and the actress Bo Derek, a big Bush supporter, Republican, and that's Wayne Newton, if I'm not mistaken. They're standing there looking up at the light stand. Maybe they're watching us. Yeah, I think they are watching us.
Bo's waving at you, Brit. She had such a good time when you interviewed her at the Republican convention.
Well,
she remembers that,
it appears at this particular moment there's some monitor down there that must have the Fox News channel on, because they all appear to be waving at least at our camera there.
Yeah, there they are.
There they are. That chap who's with her, the bald-headed guy, is the guy that was squiring her around when she was down. I believe he's a close friend or an agent or whatever. So there you see the three-fingered salute that means W. You also see a couple of two fingers. That stands for horns, as in hook 'em horns. That, of course, is the rallying cry of the Texas Longhorns, and you see many white ball cap in that crowd with a yellow T or an orange T on it. Those are the colors of the University of Texas, which is located right there in Austin. Now, we have new raw vote from Florida that may give you an idea. The margin now for Mr. Bush appears to have gone back up. It is now at 55,000 with 98% of the precincts reporting, and you begin to see why we were able to project that race, 55,000 votes. It would be quite something if 55,000 votes were ever to be able to be reversed by virtue of a recount. And of course, and even in this modern era, it took quite a while to get to a final tally there. So one presumes it was done with care and probably could be relied upon.
That's almost exactly 0.1% of the vote. And the rule of thumb is recounts will not change 0.1%. They might change 0.05%. So
look at that, though, 49 to 48. That mirrors what we showed for many hours to be the national race.
Sure.
49 to 48.
The one thing we really haven't had time to analyze is what would have happened if Al Gore had taken his home state of Tennessee with his 11 electoral votes. This would be a different story right now, right, Bill?
No, it wouldn't have mattered.
You don't think so?
Well, not on the math, I think. Assuming Wisconsin stays with Bush, Bush would have still made it.
We have some history in this country of recounts, and I can't think anybody I'd rather bring into a conversation on the subject than Mr. Elections himself, Michael Barone. Michael, what do you think about the recount prospects here?
Well, Britt, chances for recounts were much more likely to succeed back in the old days when very large numbers of votes were cast by paper ballot, and where there were all sorts of rules about it. Your X had to be crossed entirely within the circle or it didn't count and things of that nature. I grew up in Michigan in the 1950s. G. Williams, liberal Democratic governor, won on a recount for re-election in 1952, and the lawyers that did his recount work, most of them ended up as state and federal judges. Did very well. Richard Nixon in 1960, I think, made that big decision that was referred to earlier of not challenging results in Illinois. He would have had to overturn results in more than one state in order to win the presidency, on the theory that the nation should be kept together and you shouldn't have a crisis of legitimacy. The fact is, though, looking at Florida, right now we're showing, tabulated vote is showing Florida at about 55,000 vote margin for George W. Bush. That's probably going to be increased by absentees. There is no way that a 55,000 margin with today's computerized punch voting and so forth is going to be overturned absent some kind of unimaginable technical and unprecedented technical glitch. These are no longer the days when you could overturn lots of paper ballots. I think the Gore people will probably drop this idea as soon as it's apparent what this margin is.
All right, Michael, that's very interesting. Yeah, the one thing I think that we all, as we were sitting here in the final hour or two watching this vote, did not imagine would happen was that as it got down to its final stages, it would begin to build again for Governor Bush.
Yeah, and I misspoke. It's 1%, not 0.1%.
Yeah, 1%.
1% is a real margin, and as Michael says,
it's small,
that's not,
but it's real.
It's real,
and significant, and you know, it'd be remarkable for it to be reversed by a recount.
This is the challenge for Vice President Gore has got to be phenomenal here. He's been up for probably nearly 40 hours, and his future has completely reversed itself over the state of Florida, where he was declared to be ahead, then it was taken away from him, and he's been watching these numbers. This is a moment of truth done out of, it's going to be out of straight raw emotion. I can't imagine that a speech has been written. This is going to have to be Al Gore as he really is, under great stress.
Well, yeah, and you got to feel for the guy. I mean, on exhaustion and disappointment alone, I don't know. My feeling about it would be I wouldn't make a statement. I'd make a call and go to bed. But
you know, Al Gore's future reversed itself over a period of hours this evening. Remember, after Florida had been declared, in addition to Pennsylvania and Michigan, I certainly thought, and I think others here did as well, that he was headed toward the presidency. And by 11 o'clock, when California was announced that he would probably be declared the presidency, well, the reversal in Florida changed that. But imagine the up and down emotion of Gore and his family just over the course of this evening.
Yeah, you have to feel for them. You have to feel for those people. This must be about the hardest thing you can face. And it will be, I mean, I would find it hard. I mean, I imagine anybody would find it hard to summon the energy and the will to be gracious at such a time in the face of such bitter and exhausting disappointment. It must be very hard indeed, and one certainly cannot begrudge him whatever time he may want to take to get ready for this.
One thing is possible here, and that is that Gore will remain the titular head of the Democratic Party. I mean, if he'd suffered an ignominious defeat, someone else, Hillary Clinton or someone, might have emerged as the leading candidate to run again in 2004. I would think that Al Gore is the leading candidate to run in 2004, and if he wants to,
what do you think?
Sure.
No way.
Yes, absolutely.
No way.
Oh, yes.
No, I will
absolutely.
buy you the most expensive dinner in Washington if Al Gore runs for president again.
You think he'll give up politics?
There is a new face of the Democratic Party nationally, and that face is Hillary Rodham Clinton.
Yes. I don't think so.
Yes. I don't think it's Al Gore.
You don't think by she automatically becomes, if you don't buy the scenario.
Look, if Ralph Nader may have beaten Al Gore tonight, but think what that means. That means that if Al Gore had been a left liberal, he would have lost by even more.
We got a little bit of new information on the continuing tallying down there. That margin is now at 39,000, having climbed briefly back up to over 50,000. That's 99% in. What's not on that screen, of course, is how much Ralph Nader got. Ralph Nader got 94,000 votes. Pat Buchanan got 21,000. So if you assign the Buchanan votes to Bush, and you assign the other votes, the Nader votes to Gore, Gore wins. Sure. So after all, when all is said and done, finally,
that's right.
In the state where one would least, perhaps not least, but certainly would not have expected, as Bill Kristol suggested earlier, that Ralph Nader would be a factor, the Nader factor made a clear difference in the state of Florida. And I think it's fair to say, probably fair to say, that of those 94,300 votes or whatever that we have been able to note for Ralph Nader, that Gore wouldn't have gotten them all. A lot of those people wouldn't have gone to the poll. People wouldn't have gone to the polls at all, which would have been had the same effect on Gore Gore's outcome there, but that's remarkable.
Yeah, we don't really know how many of those Nader votes would have gone to Gore. I think we will have the third straight president in a row elected with less than 50% of the vote. Clinton both times failed to get 50%. It looks like Bush will fall short of 50% of the popular vote. I'm not sure. I don't think that's happened in this century. Again, another indication of how evenly divided the country is.
Let's talk a minute for a little bit further about this whole question of who becomes a leading figure in the Democratic Party. Paula, you know Hillary Clinton to some extent. What is your sense that her eye ultimately is set on the presidency?
Oh, absolutely. But what I've been hearing from my Democratic contacts is they believe Senator Joe Lieberman becomes the front runner in front of Hillary Clinton. If there's any candidate that has a shot at running and winning in 2004.
Is it thought that he disported himself well here by Democrats generally, or is there a feeling, Paul, that he had a bad outing, losing the debate to Cheney in the eyes of so many people?
Well, yeah, I think that supporters of his wished he had been a little bit stronger in that debate with Mr. Cheney, but they also, as we heard some of the exit polling coming out of Florida tonight, did pretty well with some of the elderly voters down there. I don't know. I mean, I don't know that a first-time senator, if your name is Hillary Rodham Clinton, does have that tremendous shot at becoming president in 2004. What do you think?
No, she won't. I mean, she won't. She'll keep it low. As Mara said, she'll try to be responsible and be a hard-working senator for the first couple of years. If the chance emerges in 2003 or 2004, I wouldn't be surprised to see her go for it. I mean, there are 3 Democrats who have any national name recognition now, I suppose. Mr. Gephardt, who's run for president before and has been the minority leader in the House for quite a while. Joe Lieberman, vice presidential candidate, and Hillary Clinton. You'd also have to put Gray Davis, the Democratic governor of California, who looks like a very safe bet for re-election in 2002, on the short list for 2004. But an awful lot can change in 4 years, you know.
I can't imagine that Al Gore, having come this close and having spent an entire career fighting for the top job, is going to give up and quit politics and not run again for.
Well, it's probably not going to be his choice. And clearly, who is going to get over the next year or maybe 2 years the most media attention? It's going to be Hillary Rodham Clinton. And the problem for Joe Lieberman is that he lost in popularity and favorability during this campaign. He was enthusiastically received when Gore first picked him, but he was less enthusiastically received by the public by the end of the campaign.
One other point there, this is yet another governor winning the presidency. Governors do well at winning the presidency. Senators don't. I think if Gray Davis of California wins a big re-election victory in 2002, it'll be a little bit like George W. Bush being governor of a large state, winning a big re-election victory will be formidable.
All right, we're going to go back to Austin, Texas right now, and Carl Cameron rejoins us. Hi, Carl. Any update on when we might hear from President Bush?
President-elect.
Well, President-elect Bush, yeah. Well, his staff has said that he will leave the mansion by motorcade and come the short distance to the front of the Capitol, where we will hear his remarks. There'll be an honor guard and some opening ceremonies before the governor actually speaks. They had intended to wait until after the vice president made some remarks. That may be altered depending on whether or not the vice president does, in fact, speak anytime soon. It should be noted that Governor Bush has long said that he prefers the come-from-behind type of candidacy, and that he had some success in doing that in his first gubernatorial election against Ann Richards, when he was able to surge from behind in the final hour. Tonight, I guess, would be sort of the quintessential example of that, having, according to the networks, at one point lost Florida and then come from behind to carry it by such a narrow margin. This has been a campaign that has defied conventional wisdom in a variety of ways for so long. Of course, a Republican grasping the third rail of Social Security and then able to, it seems, prevail with seniors, notwithstanding what the governor had called some scaremongering, fear-mongering, and demagoguery by the Democrats, that he would undo Social Security and deny seniors their retirement benefits. It was also noted for the longest time that the governor had refused to accept a lot of advice and counsel from Washington political experts, and that he was running a somewhat provincial campaign out of Austin, and they were determined to do it their way. And it was overlooked in many minds that there was somebody in the Bush campaign who had some experience in White House campaigns in Washington, and that, of course, was the governor himself, until such time as Dick Cheney got onto the ticket. It was thought perhaps at one point that Dick Cheney might have been a drag on the ticket, and that doesn't seem to have illustrated itself. It was thought that Joe Lieberman might have been a boost for Al Gore, and there's some question about whether or not that ever materialized. And again, now George Bush expected in just a few moments to come forward and offer something of an olive branch to Democrats. This has been a pretty partisan race with his knowledgeability and preparedness, his readiness for the White House challenged by Democrats. And in the case of Bob Kerrey of Nebraska and Tom Daschle, the Senate Minority Leader, he was pretty much pronounced as unprepared and unable to assume the presidency, and yet we are told the governor will suggest that he is ready to work with them to, as he has said all along, change the tone. Whether that is, of course, naive or even reasonable to assume at this early date, we still got to get past the possibilities of a challenge and where that comes forward.
Hey, Carl.
Carl, take a breath.
Hey, Carl. Carl, is it your understanding that the president-elect will be joined by the former president at the speech site?
George H.W. Bush and Barbara Bush have been in the mansion. We have been told for certain that the governor will talk about his dad. We expect, of course, his running mate, Dick Cheney, who's been across town at a hotel, will also make an appearance.
Carl, we have some news from Nashville. The Gore motorcade has started moving, which means that we're within about 5 minutes. He should arrive at the site there. How soon he will get himself up on the platform and say something is not entirely clear, but one presumes, in the words of Bush and Cheney, that it won't be long now.
And we still have some new information for you on the state of Wisconsin, which is too close to call. I think the last time we spoke with you, Governor Tommy Thompson was predicting that would be a Bush win, but right now we are told that Vice President Gore carries a 2,100 vote lead in the state of Wisconsin.
That was a lead, by the way. You know, we had Bush up about 9,000 votes there at one point, and it appeared from what Governor Thompson was telling us that the remaining precincts to report were in areas where Thompson, had done well and where Bush would be presumed to do well, but the lead has eroded since then, so who knows what in the dickens is going to happen out there. All of that, of course, moot in terms of the final result, but not moot in terms of the final count, and obviously in terms of the acuteness of the agony on the Gore side of being so near and so close to pulling this out. I mean, that would push him up into the 250s, and assuming any other results out there, he would have been 3 or 4, 5, 10, 15 votes away from the goal that he had sought for so much. Indeed, one might even argue for his entire political life.
All right, Mort, you're convinced that he has a political future ahead of him, but if he doesn't, what do the rest of you speculate the vice president would end up doing?
He could teach, he could write. Those are things that he seems to enjoy doing and he's good at. There are a lot of people who think that Al Gore wasn't someone who really was fit or cut out for a political career, that he would have been happier doing something else. He did go to divinity school at one point. I find it hard to believe that he would be the automatic front runner in 2004.
Well, the history
and also, where
this,
does he do? Park himself in a law firm?
Well, you know, the history of this sort of thing is that former vice presidents who lose, and this is a pattern, the incumbent vice presidents lose, they try again. Walter Mondale tried again, Richard Nixon tried again, and they got the nominations, and they, you know.
Yeah, and Richard Nixon is an interesting example, not that on any ethical level we would suggest a parallel to Gore, but there are some other similarities. Bookish types, very aggressive, very precise, very tough politicians, disciplined characters.
Loners.
Loners to a great extent, that's right. Mort, you may be right in the sense that if you don't posit Gore with a political future, what do you suggest for him that he would be? And then that sets up presumably a rivalry within the Democratic Party between Al Gore and Hillary Rodham Clinton for the affections of the party.
I just think that Hillary did not run for president and lose, and then Nixon is the only person in 40 years who ran for president, lost, and got his party's nomination again. He got it only 8 years later, after the Goldwater debacle. I just think in the modern age, you run for president, you lose, you disappear. That has been the rule. Dukakis, and it was a young man.
Well, Mondale clearly did not.
Mondale lost as vice president. He did not move the presidential race and then run again. I just think it's almost inconceivable.
He's come so close, you know, and he came from behind, and this is the fulfillment of his life. Now, it may be that the party will say, since he doesn't have great affection down the line in the party, people don't regard themselves as Gore people, that they'll want to dispense with him and just say, Al Gore, please disappear. But I think his own inclination will be to fight on.
You know, as much as we might have all thought that this Bush victory was a likelihood, it is the case that it is an historic win in an important way, and that is, for the first time, and as long as I think anyone can remember, the incumbent party nominee has been rejected by the country in a time of prosperity felt by nearly everyone, as manifested by an historic low in the unemployment rate, by far the most politically sensitive of all economic indicators, in an atmosphere in which there was not only no war involving the United States of America, but no immediate threat of war. These are conditions in which incumbent nominees win the presidency. And that was that constituted the backdrop. The X factor in this election, of course, all along, and it's the extent to which it polluted the atmosphere in the eyes of the voters was never entirely clear, were the Clinton scandals. And as Bill Kristol has pointed out, and others as well, that is really the burden he had to bear, was the Clinton burden. And the party will judge, it seems to me, how well he bore it. My sense is that given the affection which Bill Clinton continues to be held, if not in the country where he has very low personal favorability ratings, but in the Democratic Party, the verdict that Al Gore was saddled by Bill Clinton and did his best with that awful sack of rocks he had to carry will not be a verdict that very many Democrats will find very appealing.
No, and already I think the postmortems began a full week or two ago, and they were clearly among Democrats pointing the finger at Gore and blaming him for this, that he didn't run a good enough campaign, that somehow he squandered this incredible gift that he'd been given.
But he probably ran ahead of the House Democrats.
I mean, I now project, by the way, that the Nebraska Senate candidate, the Democrat there, that's Ben Nelson, wins that state. That is not a change for the Democrats, but it brings them ever closer to a goal that it appears they cannot reach tonight, and that is control of the U.S. Senate. Juan Williams?
Does push them up, Brit. It's now about a +4. They're coming close because we still have Michigan sitting out, but when you have Nelson beating Stenberg, Nelson, of course, taking Bob Kerry's seat, Bob Kerry retiring, then going off to run the new school here in New York City.
That's +3, isn't it, Juan?
I think it's +4 now, Britt. And so what we see...
Well, but that's not a switch, Juan. I don't think Ben Nelson is a switch. Right?
No, Ben Nelson's not a switch, but it is already standing at +4, and we have Michigan sitting out, Stabenow versus Spencer.
So that gets the Democrats to a possible 49.
Right.
Right, okay.
But again, you're seeing, we were talking about divided government. We're talking about what's going to be possible, what's the agenda going to be, and you see in the Senate, real division here now. It's going to be very close. I think harder for Trent Lott to govern, and maybe a bigger role for Tom Daschle as the minority leader.
All right, we're going to take some time out now for some shameless self-promotion. You want to know what these folks are waving at on the Jumbotron themselves? They are seeing themselves on the Fox News Channel feed, the way a lot of these folks found out that George W. Bush was the president-elect.
Yeah, that's a picture there of the Jumbotron in Austin with the Fox News Channel on there. They've been rotating around, it should be said in fairness. They've had us on, but they've had others on as well. But they apparently were on us at the moment we projected the victory for Governor Bush, and that, of course, set off the wild celebration which continues to this very minute as we await the arrival of Vice President Gore at his appointed place in Nashville, and we await with some suspense just exactly what he will say. Fred?
Well, I have some suspense about that as well. I don't know what he's going to say. Let me mention a couple things about President-elect Bush, however. There are a couple of rules he broke tonight in winning the presidency. One is that I think he's the first Republican to win the presidency after losing the New Hampshire primary. I don't think another Republican has done that.
That's history.
And secondly, he's the first president since James A. Garfield in 1880, the first Republican to win the presidency without winning California. Now, the Florida rule, of course, he won Florida, and that still applies. But not winning California, remember, only 20 years ago, the Republican base presidentially was Florida and California. You could hardly say they're that anymore.
There's one other person tonight who must be experiencing exultation, perhaps, but more than that, the deepest sense of relief, and that would be Jeb Bush.
Yeah.
Governor of the state of Florida.
For a moment there, it looked pretty dicey for him.
Yeah, well, that was tough.
He can stay in the family.
Yeah, I imagine. Tony Snow, your thoughts on all of this?
Well, one of the fascinating things tonight, Britt, is this may have been the most polled election in our lifetimes. And what's sort of gratifying is that virtually every pollster was wrong. A lot of times I think we tend to look upon polls as destiny, and we covered them day in and day out. But lo and behold, this turned out to be a far closer election than anybody predicted. And at the same time, you look at our own exit polls. Again, I'm talking about polls. It appears that despite the fact that you're going to have very narrow Republican majorities in both houses, there may be some key issues on which Democrats and Republicans can do business. We heard before talk about Bill Clinton and what a popular president he was among Democrats. One of the things that Bill Clinton was successful at was identifying a couple of issues on which Democrats and Republicans could work together, including free trade and welfare reform. Look for George W. Bush to start looking for common ground on things like Social Security, a very surprising poll result we saw there tonight. In addition, on educational reform, he may be able to cobble together a bipartisan agreement there. Also, George W. Bush is somebody who did not succeed very well tonight in reaching out to black voters. Look for him to be much more assertive than any Republican president in our lifetime, to go out and try to court black voters in the years ahead, court Hispanic voters, try to put California back in play for Republicans, and also court the women's vote. A lot of these have been things that Republicans have left lagging over the last few years. George W. Bush succeeded in increasing his vote margins with all of those groups during his 2 terms as Texas governor, and I think that's probably the template you got to look forward to when he becomes president. As for Al Gore tonight, you know, Al Gore, you got to take your hat off to him. Here's a guy who's will have been up for 48 straight hours. Al Gore works harder than just about anybody in the business of politics. And as we've said tonight, you got to feel for him and everybody else in his campaign. I'll be very interested to see what happens. My guess is what he will do is try to rally his troops and then get off the stage and hope some miracle happens for him in the state of Florida.
All right, Tony, thank you. We really have no update. We know that the vice president has left his hotel. He's in a motorcade, but we haven't been given an update on his position right now. Actually, we just got a 2-minute warning. Isn't it funny how that happens on live television? Michael Barone, why don't you spend some time with us before we cut away to the vice president's speech?
Well, let me just share a few thoughts I had about the Democratic Party. I think it's likely that George W. Bush, as president, is going to unite in many ways the Republican Party, as Bill Clinton just so successfully did with the Democratic Party. The problem with the Democratic Party now, I think, is not just which individual comes forward. Obviously, probably in polls, Hillary Rodham Clinton will be the person, you know, the plurality choice for president in 2004. It's also institutionally. I mean, Bill Clinton built a Democratic Party that brought together the labor unions, rich liberals, trial lawyers, the feminist left, the New Democrats. All those are significant fundraising, and many of them are significant on-the-ground constituencies, labor unions growing especially. What is going to keep them together? They've got different agendas, different complaints about Al Gore's campaign, different ideas about how to go after victory in 2002 and 2004. You know, the natural tendency of the Democratic Party over its history has been to be a vociferous party, splitting off into its parts, and without a presidential leader, it may do so again.
All right, Michael, thanks very much. I wonder if we're able to talk to Jim Angle down there in Nashville as we await the arrival on the scene there and the remarks of Vice President Gore.
Hello, Brett.
Hi, Jim. What's the scene down there like? Subdued, I guess.
Well, it's very they're playing music, as you can hear in the background, but it is very subdued. There are a few staff members starting to file in, some of the lower level people with the looks on their faces that tell the story here, and that is that Al Gore, after running for the presidency for at least 12 years, but really for much of his life, has lost his bid for the White House. You can see it on the faces of people here. We will soon hear from Al Gore himself. Whatever words he uses, Britt, will be very, very difficult for him. You know, just a couple of nights ago, in a very late night speech to a group, he seemed to speak in a more personal way, as he often does when he's tired, and he said, "I can't believe that the American people would choose someone," and then he goes on to list all of the views that Governor Bush holds, and there was a certain disbelief in his voice and in his thoughts that he could lose this race, that he could not win given the positions he had on the issues. That is what has happened. I think it will be very difficult for Al Gore to accept that. It will be very difficult for him to articulate it here. to people who were certain all along that he would eventually prevail, Britt.
Jim, what is your guess here? Are we going to hear a concession speech? Are we going to hear congratulations? Are we going to hear about a phone call? What is your estimation?
Well, you know, if indeed they do plan to dispute the count in Florida, which is what we had learned earlier, and then what you had said they announced, I think, in public that they were going to ask for a recount, it would be odd to come out and tell everyone, well, we've lost, if in fact you think there's a way you might win. So he might be able to walk that line, as you and Fred and others were talking about there earlier. He might be able to walk that line and simply say, it's very, very close. It doesn't look good. There may be more news tomorrow, but at the moment it appears that Governor Bush has won. If that is the case, then I congratulate him. You could do it that way. As I say, it's going to be very tough for Gore. He is not always reflective in these moments. With most of the times when we see him in a reflective mood, it's when he's exhausted and tends to express more personal views than a speech written for him by someone else. Perhaps that will happen tonight. This has been a very, very long trek for him, Britt, as you know. He was raised, his family once said, to be president. It is his entire life has been aimed at this office, and now it appears to have slipped away from him.
Well, indeed it has, Jim, and you know, you see that impressive facade there at the War Memorial with the lights playing on those columns there, and the American flag as the backdrop, and that very large stage laid out there for what he and his partisans must clearly have thought was going to be a victory celebration tonight, capping one of the most remarkable comebacks in recent presidential history, one in which even as recently as the middle of last week, the presidency appeared to be out of reach for him, and now you see a situation in which he's forced to come out here tonight with the bitterness, the bitter taste of apparent defeat in his mouth. Not an easy moment, Jim, and we'll be back to you as you have more to add for us on that point, what this must be like for Vice President Gore. And we've been given a 2-minute warning. We seem to be past that 2 minutes by now.
Yeah,
still no sign of Al Gore. So we're in a position to take a further look at that vote tally in Florida. Any late numbers there, I wonder, folks, whether we're able to do that. The margin had shrunk down to about 40,000 votes, which was more than it had been for a while, but also less than it had been when it had popped up briefly over 50,000. So perhaps that's what Mr. Gore is waiting for the latest word on.
We, of course, are continuing to wait for...
Yeah, we are. The latest we have is, wow, look at that. 40,000, 39,000 plus, 99% of precincts in. It doesn't appear that Buchanan with, 94,000 votes for Ralph Nader, and as we remarked, obviously that clearly made the difference in the state of Florida, and Ralph Nader, I guess, can live with the fact that he put Al Gore in the presidency and appears not to have gotten anywhere near the 5% he needed to give his Green Party the eligibility for federal funds that it will need in 4 years, Bill.
You know, I've got to think, with that margin, assuming now really virtually all the votes are in, that Al Gore will concede. I don't believe he's going to put the country through 2 days of sort of quasi-suspense about who the next president is.
The word is that the reason for the delay is that it is taking a few moments to load his speech into the teleprompter. So presumably he will speak from a prepared text, and that might help to explain why it took him a while to get here. Someone was obviously drafting, perhaps with his participation. Obviously with his participation to some extent, some remarks for him to make at this very difficult moment indeed for him.
Bob Schramm, who's one of Al Gore's top advisors, has written eloquent concession speeches before Teddy Kennedy's famous speech at the 1980 Democratic Convention, for example. Though on this kind of speech, I was with Vice President Quayle in 1992 when we conceded, and John McConnell, who now works for Governor Bush, had written eloquent remarks for the Vice President. He didn't use them, and he spoke from the heart, and spoke eloquently, actually, and showed real character in his concession. I suspect Vice President Gore will want to say what's in his heart, but I've got to think he's going to concede and not try to get cute with a kind of, let's see what happens tomorrow in a recount.
Well, we'll see. We should be seeing in just a few minutes as he comes out on the stage there in the very quiet atmosphere of the streets there in Nashville, Tennessee, outside the War Memorial there, where his partisans had been planning a victory celebration that is not to be tonight.
We continue to, of course, wait for the results in Oregon, and I'm wondering, Brit, you just made the point that it seems, I guess, abundantly clear at this point that Ralph Nader will not get that 5% that he needed to create his watchdog party and give it the viability he wanted it to have in the next election. But I guess what I wanted to throw out to you all is how you think Ralph Nader will be perceived on this Wednesday morning.
Hold on just a second before we do that. There's an AP radio report out that numbers the size of the Bush win in Florida in the hundreds. That would be recount material if there ever was one. Let's go to Carl Cameron to see if he has anything on that. Carl?
Yeah, Britt, about 35, 40 minutes ago, the governor received a phone call from the vice president. The Bush campaign is now given to believe that the vice president will be making a concession speech, and the aides to the governor say that he wished the vice president well, congratulated him on a fight well fought, said that he respected the vice president and that he understood that he said that the vice president was a good man. All the types of dignity and victory and taking sort of a high road, being a good winner that one would expect under these circumstances. And the governor is obviously now waiting to get the vice president in his remarks under his belt before he comes out here. The call initiated by the vice president, received by Governor Bush.
All right, let's take a look, if we can, again at those raw vote numbers we were just looking at a moment ago. That is the state of Florida. And that projects the race having tightened still further down to a margin of something in the neighborhood of 10 or 11,000 votes. That obviously begins to look agonizingly close again. And we keep seeing that there are 99% of the precincts in, but if that 1% of the precincts, it's still out there, has been causing some consternation as this vote tally continues. Nobody apparently preparing to make any changes in their estimates for that outcome. So we await Vice President Gore's remarks as the closeness of the race becomes ever more apparent. Here you're hearing the quiet chant beginning to go up from the people who are saying they want Gore. So we presumably will be hearing from him shortly. Bill, just some reflections now. We see that margin now having shrunk down to something in the neighborhood of 10 to 11,000 votes. That places it in a kind of a special category, doesn't it?
Yeah, if it holds at 11,000 votes, that would mean that, 5,500 votes swinging the other way would have changed the election. I think this would be the only time in this century that few votes in one state could have flipped an election. In both Kennedy's victory in 1960 and Carter's in 1976, that number of votes in two states, if they had flipped, would have changed the election. So I think we could say that this is the closest presidential election in this century.
Remarkable. Remarkable. Gore partisans there, eagerly awaiting his appearance on the platform. So far, it has not materialized. We're standing by waiting. Michael Barone, your thoughts?
Well, I guess I'd give Bill a little bit of a challenge on that 1916 when California decided the election for Woodrow Wilson over Charles Evans Hughes.
I was just testing Mike. I knew that, but I just wanted to see if he was alert at this time of night.
That was 84. That was 84 years ago, and in many ways it was another country. And I think Bill's point is well taken. This is a classic civics lesson for those people who say my vote doesn't count.
And also, I think Bill said in this century. He's certainly right about this century. If we believe that this is indeed the 21st century and not, as some sticklers say, the last year of the 20th century, then Bill's got it right technically anyway.
Clintonian defense.
It's also it would also be not only the smallest margin but the biggest margin.
Thank you, Brett. Thank you for that help.
All right, we're still expecting that Vice President Gore will arrive on the scene. That could be in the van down there. Cheers periodically go up as if someone has had a Gore sighting, but so far, no.
I guess at some point today we might hear the President Clinton reflect on what has happened on election night. He clearly views his wife's victory in New York as an important part of his legacy. However, with the Republicans seemingly maintaining control of the House and the Senate, it's a different story, isn't it, Mara?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
We have a projection, by the way, that Montana, in the state of Montana, that the Republicans will hold that governorship out there. I don't think there was a great deal of suspense about that, but there you see the Governor March, the Republican, holds on. Close race. But 87% of the precincts in out there, you see.
Well, of course, the departing governor, Marc Racicot, is very close to George Bush, and now that Bush is the president-elect, is widely regarded as the likeliest new Interior Secretary.
Really? That's interesting. Okay, he was the one, wasn't he, that was in that big controversy fight with the Clinton administration over the handling of some forest fires out there, and felt that had been badly done, and got himself a few moments in the national limelight as a result of that. Somebody's waving at either a camera monitor or at somebody they think they know in Nashville as we continue to wait for Al Gore to come out and say something.
Well, in answer to your question, Paula, it will test Bill Clinton's self-discipline for him not to have it leak out somehow that if only he'd been used more, or if only there had been more emphasis on his record, or so-and-so that Al Gore might have eked over the top, because there was
already done it.
He's already done it. But no, what I mean to afflict Al Gore even more than he is, to have recriminations from the White House, will not help.
Of course, the interesting thing is, what does Bill Clinton do now? He will be a Senate spouse, so he will be on the Washington scene in some respect, and he's as much of a magnet for press coverage as his wife is going to be.
Not only press coverage.
For paparazzi stakeouts and tabloid curiosity, but he got his, he needed to get the House back, Gore elected, and Mrs. Clinton elected in order, I think, to really redeem himself.
Jim Angle, what are you hearing and seeing down there, buddy?
Well, at this point, you're seeing more and more staff file in here, Britt, and stand in the rain to wait for the man that they've worked for so many hours. You know what a presidential campaign is like. People work for sometimes more than a year, but certainly for all of the election year. They sometimes work 16, 18 hours a day for very little pay, put all of their lives on the line for this one race, for this one man. And you can imagine the letdown when it doesn't happen. Let me add one thing about President Clinton, Britt. All through this year, we kept hearing from people we knew at the White House that the president had this suggestion or that suggestion. At the time of the Democratic convention, one former White House official told me that the feeling from Clinton and others around him was that Al Gore would rather lose the election on his own than take advice from Bill Clinton. At the time, the Gore people, of course, didn't think that's the way it would turn out. It does, in fact, look like it's turned out that way now. Now, we hear some cheers behind us, Brit, so...
I think what we're hearing is they're listening to the coverage on CBS News, and perhaps CBS News is popular with the Gore partisans. It wouldn't surprise me if it were.
Well, fortunately, they switch around here, Britt, so Fox News has had its place in the sun as well on this screen, and it goes from time to time. It depends on what is being announced. Anytime he wins a state, there are cheers. Anytime there's bad news, sometimes boos.
All right, Jim, thanks very much. We continue to wait, as we say, for Vice President Gore to show up and say something. That, of course, is not only keeping him up for a few more hours, it's keeping everybody in Austin up and everybody here in New York as well, as we wait to see what is finally going to be said here. I wonder if we have an update on the the raw vote count in Florida, which continues to fascinate me as it draws seemingly ever closer as we get down to the wire. Apparently too late now for it to be reversed. The margin sufficient apparently to hold, but it must be an agony for the Gore partisans to see it be so very close. 11,000 was the number of votes when we last looked, so that gives you an idea of how painful this has to be for people who are pulling for Al Gore in that state and in this country tonight.
As we await the Vice President's remarks, I'm wondering if we could visit the issue of something that Carl Cameron brought up as early as this weekend when he talked about the great sense of optimism that Governor Bush had, and he said at that point the governor was already making calls about a transition team or potentially talk about folks that might play a role in his administration. Do you care to, this evening, speculate on that? We know, of course, Colin Powell has been mentioned as a potential Secretary of State candidate. Condoleezza Rice, maybe. National Security Advisor, perhaps? Any other names we want to bat around?
Well, what were you going to go ahead? As Bill has pointed out earlier, he's going to name a Democrat to some major post. There are 4 major positions: Treasury, Defense, State, and the Attorney General. The most likely one would be a defense at this point, and that the name that comes to mind, and one that Bill has mentioned earlier, is Sam Nunn, the former senator from Georgia, fairly hawkish on defense, except once. And unfortunatately, that was a tie.
Right,
Don Baer with a bag over his head. That's Baer's a former Clinton speechwriter, right. and was active, I believe, in the Gore campaign.
Mm-hmm. I don't think that he could appoint someone who voted against the Persian Gulf War.
As Sam Nunn did, and actually led the opposition to the Persian Gulf War. But
Al Gore.
One available candidate is Chuck Robb, who was a defeated senator,
now,
former
how did he
Marine,
vote on the Persian Gulf
War?
War?
He voted for the Persian Gulf War.
This is kind of oddly, grimly fascinating to watch this scene down there. That's Austin now, huh? Quiet there, too, it seems.
One of the questions is, what role will Don Evans, who is the campaign chairman, the best friend of George W. Bush, what role will he have? And the best guess is he'll either be Commerce Secretary, he is a businessman from Midland, Texas, or a counselor to the president, which would have him in constant contact with the president, and they are extremely close friends.
Britt, now that Bush has won, normal people are going to sleep, or they're waiting to see. They're waiting to see Gore concede in Bush's speech, I'm sure, watching us here on the Fox News channel. But in Washington, there are tens, maybe hundreds of Republicans, maybe thousands, freshening up that resume, getting ready to bring it to fax it at 7 a.m. in the morning or FedEx it down to Austin.
Clay Johnson is the man.
The scramble for jobs in the Bush administration, I believe, has probably already begun.
It's probably already a stampede.
Right.
For the record, we've now been on the air almost 8.5 hours straight. Britt, can you even remember the last time you've been on the air for live coverage of story for 8 hours straight?
In my particular case, Paula, since we came on at 6, it's now 9 hours and 33 minutes.
Oh, beating me.
So I'm...
we might think about giving you breakfast in an hour or two.
People used to call Walter Cronkite old iron pants for his ability to stay on the air for long hours and never lose his edge. I don't think anybody's ever going to say that about me. I'm about ready for Mr. Gore to come out here now and put all those people down there, give them a chance to get some rest, perhaps, and himself as well.
Brit, not to belabor this, who George Bush will appoint, but one of the most important jobs in an administration, if not the most important, is White House Chief of Staff. His Chief of Staff in Texas is Ed Albaugh, who's been
Joe Albaugh.
Joe Albaugh, rather. I think the best guess is that while Albaugh might be Deputy Chief of Staff, he will pick someone with some Washington and national political experience to be the White House Chief of Staff in his new administration. There,
speculation has been that
I wonder if the weight here is occasioned by the fact that that vote got narrow again in Florida. I mean, we've sort of been tiptoeing around that, but it's worth wondering about that, whether they began to think that call may be pulled back. There's no indication that anybody is yet going to do that.
Have they gone to 100% in Florida yet?
They haven't gone to. I don't believe they have, obviously they may not get to 100% because they can't because of absentee ballots or whatever. So you have that to wonder about, whether they may be holding that back. So they may be, Vice President may be waiting in some hope that the call would be reversed. There's no indication anything like that's going to happen.
It would be a fitting end to the last 8 years, which have had the character of an Alan Drury novel, an exciting Washington. We've had Gingrich's rise and fall, Clinton's impeachment. We've had what looks like Bush winning the presidency by the margin of one state, a state that was called for Gore earlier in the evening. If it were recalled now, I guess that's the right word, or reversed, it would be truly extraordinary.
Carl Cameron, of course, reporting a little bit earlier.
Look at that popular vote.
Wow. Look at those
We're now down to 1,000 and more. 100. Well, 45,000. What?
It's a 200,000.
200,000 vote.
Yeah, about close to 200,000 vote margin out of presumably almost 100 million passed.
However, the Secretary of State down there is saying that the margin's about 600 votes.
In Florida?
In
Florida. And that may be what's holding Gore up. VNS is saying it's about 6,000. VNS, it's not unusual for the Voter News Service to have a more sophisticated vote counting apparatus in play because of the availability of computers than it is sometimes the case with Secretaries of State.
And he has to come out now and make a public statement. One aide saying that the Vice President could just come out.
So we're overhearing a reporter now. Let's check in with Michael Barone for a moment on this issue, Michael. Secretary of State of Florida saying this is a 600 vote margin. That's not a winning. That's the kind of margin you don't make a call on if you're the Voter News Service. So, does it occur to you possibly this may not be over yet?
Well, VNS, as you noted, Brit, has a 6,000 vote margin. I think, if I was the Gore campaign, I certainly would want to take a close look at that. As I say, I think there's still this military vote out. We don't know the size of it. I don't know what the size of it was 4 years ago. The other people may do so, which could change that result from one that looks pretty close and worthy of a recount or a code check to one that looks out of range of change. So, Britt, I don't know, I wonder whether this is one of the reasons for the apparent delay in Mr. Gore's appearance.
Even the VNS number, 6,000, that is 0.1% of the vote. There were almost 6 million votes cast in Florida. So you're looking at you're looking at winning the presidency with a 0.1% margin in one state.
Yeah, it's similar to, in Illinois in 1960, I think it was 8,838 votes was the recorded total for President Kennedy, in a turnout of similar size, 4 million. That was not, however, the sole decisive state.
Mike, is the Secretary of State in Florida a Republican or a Democrat?
My recollection is that the Secretary of State in Illinois is a Florida, excuse me, is a Republican, and has been. Check it in the volume here that I've got right now. It is a partisan elected position, and it's one that Republicans have been very successful in Florida in winning down-ballot offices at the statewide level. They've been successful in winning a whole lot of offices and majorities in both houses of the state legislature, and the Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, is a Republican. So she presumably is a political ally of Governor Jeb Bush.
Now we hear the cry of recount, recount, periodically welling up from the assembled multitude, if that's what it is, outside the Gore planned event there in Nashville.
Well, Al Gore may feel that he has a really difficult decision to make. You've got one state with apparently right now a pretty small popular vote majority showing on the boards. Should you issue this concession statement? Should you shut down any chance of challenging this, or should you leave it open? I mean, the first decision to accept the result was the one that was made by Richard Nixon in 1960, and he wrote later that he felt that to do something else would be divisive and would weaken the power and influence of America in the world, that you had to have one leader, and to have ambiguity or a cloud cast on the succession to office of president in this country would be very harmful to America's interests. On the other hand, Mr. Gore, might reasonably think, hey, if I really did get more votes in more states with 270 electoral votes, then I should be elected president. And there's, maybe we should wait up beyond, we're now about 1 hour and 23 minutes after Fox News first declared George Bush the winner of the presidency. Maybe we'll just wait a little longer.
You brought up the issue, Fred, a little bit earlier on of the post being a partisan post of the person overseeing this election. You're by no means suggesting, nor have we heard anybody here this evening suggest there has been any fraud or favorable behavior towards Governor Bush.
And actually, this person who Mike says is a Republican, the Secretary of State in Florida, actually is showing it much closer for Gore than VNS is.
It is the case now that one of the things that's happening in Florida is that they are counting absentee ballots in 27 precincts. No estimate of the total number, but these are in the Dade County area. However, so far they're running about 58 to 41 for Bush. So not much reason to believe at this stage that they could reverse the call that has been made now by nearly everybody, but there you have it.
Well, Britt, those would bear the same relationship to the overall Dade County vote as absentee being about 10 points more Republican, as absentee ballots tend to relate to votes cast at the polls in most elections.
We continue to hear the surge come from the crowd, and we can't really identify why that's coming. I guess anytime it appears as though someone's heading for the podium, you see kind of this well up in enthusiasm.
The Florida Division of Elections is now saying that there will be an automatic recount of the ballots in Florida because of a statutory recount provision that says if there's a gap of 0.5, Bill Kristol's talked about this, or less between candidates. Right now, with 99.9% of the vote counted, both Bush and Gore have 48.9% of the vote. Gore down by 630 votes. The only way there would not be a recount is if the candidate eliminated requests in writing that a recount not be done, or submitted a request in writing that a recount not be done. So that's it now. That's striking stuff, though, folks. Now,
so is that, do you think that makes it increasingly unlikely we will hear from the Vice President this evening, team?
He must be considering what to say.
Right.
And with 600, if it is truly 630 votes, I would suspect that he would want to leave the option open for a recount and say something conditional, subject to a recount. I congratulate Governor Bush, or something.
I think he has to say something. I mean, these people are waiting to hear from him, and I'm assuming he will come out, he will say something, but he probably wants to leave his options open.
They just told me again and took the concession.
You took it back?
Thank you all for bearing with us as we try to gain better insights as to what's going on in Florida.
I think he should. I mean, I think You could still give the sort of speech.
Let's go to Carl for some sense of what's going on there in Austin. Carl?
Well, Britt, while you see the jubilation in Nashville, a stunned silence has fallen over the crowd in Austin. Vice-President Al Gore has called Governor Bush and retracted his concession because he is now of a mind that things could be turning yet again in Florida. If there were any more surprises that could take place tonight, it seems impossible to imagine. There you see a live shot of the audience here in Austin with word rippling through the crowd that the Vice President's concession speech is now apparently null and void, and we are back in a holding pattern as to when we will hear from the Vice President what he'll say and what the Governor will be able to say pending any kind of remarks from the Vice President. Another stunner. Britt, Paula?
I would say so. What does everybody make of that?
Well, if it is only 630 votes, you can certainly see why he wants to wait. Now, those are real votes, not projections. Maybe within the hour we'll get some more results.
I'm confused by the 6,000 gap on the VNS and the 600 gap in the Secretary of State.
Why project anymore?
But look, if it's 600 votes, we're not going to know the winner of the presidency for 24 hours, I think. The recount will take a little time.
Well, walk us through the process of a recount. How long could it feasibly take?
Well, each state has its own rules, and I don't know Florida's rules. I'm sure we have people looking them up right now, but these are complicated rules about how you supervise the paper, the write-in ballots, people, usually you have independent observers come and look at each machine as it's reopened to see that the count was accurate. It can take a while. It's a big state, Florida, and you know, if it's really in the 630 range, not the 6,000 range, 6,000 is close, but still probably enough to sort of be reasonably confident. 600 votes is tiny.
They're still the only
0.01%, 600 votes.
The only votes left to be counted, according to these the information we have, is from the Miami Gold Coast area, which is a Gore area.
But yeah.
But that's, and everything else is all the returns are in, with the exception of those overseas.
Yeah, but it's 99.9%,
yeah.
right?
And
so,
the 0.1% is.
Well, it is, but remember, a lot of what we were talking about apparently is absentee votes are being counted, in which we're breaking toward Governor Bush. So perhaps we'll get some information from our decision desk about why this is a call that nobody seems yet to be retracting. As far as we know, Al Gore's retracted his concession, but the network projections remain unanimous at this stage in favor of Governor Bush. There it is. That shows a 6,000 vote margin with 99% of precincts in. Presumably, the vote is now almost entirely counted.
And of course, that is real votes. I mean, that is not any kind of projection. So somehow VNS is counting some votes that the Secretary of State of Florida has not quite yet counted, maybe some of those absentee ballots we were talking about, or conversely, the Secretary of State of Florida has counted a few ballots that VNS hasn't registered yet, and it's really 600. I don't know which is the case, obviously.
Although what you reported before was that there had to be an automatic recount, which it appears that there will be now, which will
let's
delay
let's hear what Jim Angle may be about to tell us about this. Jim, what are you hearing?
We're not hearing anything here, Britt. We have seen staff members wandering around the audience in a sort of a daze. Some of the people like Bruce Reed from the White House, who's worked on domestic policy for them, people just sort of stumbling around here waiting to hear what in fact is going on. It is not clear now what the Vice President will or will not do. And as we had discussed earlier, there's the possibility of him trying to walk a fine line here, depending on what might or might not happen later on with a recount. That looks like the line they're now trying to figure out how to walk. So we'll have to wait to see what the Vice President does when he comes out here. But that is obviously part of the holdup as they try to figure out what to say about what has happened. Brett.
All right, Jim, thanks very much. Well, we were for the longest time tonight waiting to be able to make a call in Florida, and we thought when we did and it put somebody over the top that would be the beginning of the end of the evening. It turns out so far to being the end of the beginning of the evening. So, so we're hanging on here. Stay with us, everybody.
Bill Kristol, jump in here.
Well, you know, even if it's a 6,000 vote margin, that's about 0.1%. The rules of the Florida law says if it's 0.5% or below margin, there's an automatic recount unless the candidate in writing does not request one. So even if it's a 6,000 vote margin, as I understand it, the vice president would have to formally not request a recount and concede.
We're going to listen to what's coming out of Nashville right now.
Is there a mechanism, Mr. Cast, by which the state of Florida would automatically do its own recount?
Well, obviously, from what little I could hear from the strains coming through from the podium there was a mention of Florida, and there was a mention of counting of votes. I don't know if anybody else picked up any more than I just did.
They appeared to be watching CNN on the monitor, and they were asking just the questions that we are asking right here, which is how does a recount work? And
this is true.
It was very difficult to gauge what's going on in this crowd because, as Jim Engel reported, the various networks' feeds are being rotated through the huge jumbotron there. And as Mara just said, they could very well be reacting to even some analysis they're hearing on one of the networks. But at one point, it appeared as though someone was trying to update these folks on the status of the Florida vote.
Other than I can tell you that in 1996, there was roughly 2,200 of those that were counted in the 10-day count.
Well, we don't want to break away to their coverage because ours is so much far superior to that. More than anything going through your minds as we watch this unfold?
It's such an incredible moment of American history where everything is just on a pivot and a knife edge. And, you know, the vice president clearly is making one of the most momentous decisions of his life and in American political history as to whether to apparently he's not going to concede. And you know, what is he going to say something? What is he going to say? Is he going to be gracious? Is he going to be angry?
Or does he come out at all?
Or does he come out at all? Well, he's got a lot of people standing there waiting to hear him.
I guess
he might well just tell everybody to go to bed because they're going to be up late tomorrow night waiting for the results.
Well, at this point, the most logical.
Carl Cameron, we're going to rejoin you in Austin and see if you have any more information for us. What is the Bush camp expecting now?
Well, they're trying to maintain their composure in this roller coaster. From the Bush campaign's perspective, the vice president's decision to sort of retract or withhold or rescind his concession is hinged on the overseas ballots in Florida, the absentee ballots that have yet to be counted. Now, the Bush campaign maintains that historical trends indicate that absentee ballots from overseas U.S. citizens tend to lean Republican. So in their view, the vice president's logic or calculations may not bear out, but there is a significant number of those absentee ballots that may not be counted for as much as a week to 10 days, because as long as they are date stamped on election day, they can be mailed in from Europe or Asia or around the world and still be counted for another 10 days before they actually get into the Secretary of State's office and be tallied. Paula?
All right, Carl, have you come to expect any kind of announcement from the vice president tonight? I know he's weighing out a number of options even as we speak.
Well, I'm not so sure about the vice president. The governor still intends to come out, but I think what we've come to expect is that you can't expect anything to stay constant in this. How many times can it change? Just an amazing evening, and everybody's just waiting for the next shoe to fall.
All right, we have just learned that Bill Daley of the Gore campaign is expected to address this crowd in Nashville shortly, which hopefully will clear up all these questions we've just posed as to what's going on with the status of this Florida vote.
Well, if Bill Daley's going to speak, he is probably going to announce that they're going to let the recount go ahead. I mean, as I understand Florida law, they don't have to affirmatively ask for a recount. They merely have to let the recount that happens automatically move ahead. And obviously, if Bill Daley speaks in place of Al Gore, it's going to be to say this election is not over.
Fred?
Well, that's the logical thing to do with it that close. I wouldn't expect Al Gore to step in and say the recount should not go ahead.
Now, if you were giving Governor Bush some advice right now, and if he plans to speak publicly, what can he possibly say? I guess obviously he has to react to what Bill Daley's saying first.
I would, yes, and I would think that he would say that there will be a recount. We think we've won, and thank everyone for everything they've done. But he needs to be very gracious at this point, and the law requires that there be a recount, and he's got to abide by it. So he can't exactly declare victory on an open and shut basis.
We're going to break away. We'll break away to Orlando Salinas, who joins us again from Miami, who has a little bit more information on how this recount might take place. Orlando, what do you have?
Hi, Paula. Hey, gang out there. Let me tell you this. Right now, we have been talking on the phone with the folks at the Division of Elections. Here's what they tell us. They're saying, look, this recount could begin sometime within the next 24 hours. That could happen. They're also saying, look, the machines have to be reset. There are certain sorts of machinations that certainly have to start taking place before the recount could actually start. But they're saying that certainly is going to be an option. Let me give you some hard numbers also, folks. Look, right now, a few minutes ago, off of their website, the Division of Elections website here in Florida, they are saying it's at 2,904,198 for Bush. For Gore, 2,902,988. That's about 48.9 again, as we've been saying for Bush, 48.9 for Gore, split right around there. A few minutes ago, 15, 20 minutes ago, we saw a spread of about 630 votes. Now it's up to about 1,000 vote difference between Gore and Bush. I know you folks, we've been talking about the VNS count, roughly about 5,000, 6,000 votes. Here we're going on what we're seeing from the Division of Elections, the people who really are in charge of this whole thing. They're sticking to their numbers of about 1,000, not the 6,000 that VNS is saying. Not really sure, like William Kristol has been saying, where they're getting those numbers from. We're sticking by the Department of Elections for sure. Also, Brit, you and Paula have been asking, look, where are these last precincts coming from? They're coming from Broward County and also in Miami-Dade County, as you've been saying. Let me also tell you this much. We do know now that Citrus County, also Hendrie County, and Hillsborough County, that is where Tampa is in. Of course, remember Central Florida, Tampa, those independent voters. We're looking at some of this latest information coming to us right now from, again, the Division of Elections. They're telling us that those three counties, Citrus, Hendrie, and Hillsborough counties, those folks have not, as of right now, counted all of their absentee ballots. So this could be really huge. Also, we know that we were asking earlier what happens to those military votes, those absentee votes. Back, the Division of Elections tells us, look, you have to go back to 1996. Back in 1996, there were about 2,300 absentee votes that were attributed to the military. And they're telling us early this morning again that, look, chances are that they could fall that way again. Those votes did tend to fall Republican. They tended to. That was in 96. Things have happened. Certainly, these are two different candidates, Gore and Bush, both having strong military records, both being criticized to a degree in the different capacities that they may have served in the military. But again, that is the latest breakdown that we're looking at right now. Again, it looks as if there was about 1,000 vote difference here in the state of Florida between Gore and Bush. That favoring, that 1,000 vote difference, it looks like right now is still leaning towards George W. Bush,
all right,
guys.
Orlando, thank you so much.
Sure.
Brit's back now with some more detailed
Here's the latest information we have that has been coming into our decision desk. The lead now, as they're continuing to count some of these Dade County votes, is now 1,800 votes for George W. Bush. That is up from the 600 or so, 550 to 650 or so, which is where it stood earlier. These are absentee votes now that are being counted and added in, and they are now adding to the Bush margin, razor thin though it is. One network, ABC News, was polling the Voter News Service to see if it was appropriate to take back the call. No decision has been made to do that yet by anybody, as far as I can tell, and it appears that while this has gotten down to this extremely close margin, that it's not clear where the votes would come from, and the vote that, although they are coming from a section of the state where Vice President Gore would appear to do well, they are absentee ballots, which Mr. Bush has been doing well. In addition to that is the fact that, as you heard Orlando mention, there are military absentee ballots in uncertain numbers. There are not very many people who expect that they would break for Vice President Gore. So the outlook appears at this moment to be for the margin for Bush to perhaps build, but it has become so extremely close that everyone is really naturally very nervous about it. It's a margin in the neighborhood of 1,800 votes. So that is where we now stand. In 10 seconds, it will be, or less than that now, about 3 seconds until 4 a.m. Hopes rising in Nashville, stunned silence hanging over Austin, Texas, after Mr. Gore had decided to retract the concession he made by telephone to Governor Bush not so very long ago.
Campaign Chair Bill Daley is expected to speak to this crowd in Nashville. We don't have any idea when that will take place. I'm hoping soon, sometime within this hour. Probably would suit all of us just fine.
Let's go to Michael Barone for reflections he may have on the situation with these votes. Michael?
Well, Britt, I think that from what I've seen of the Florida votes, your summary was basically accurate. Our correspondent in Miami reported 3 counties in Florida still had absentee ballots left to vote. Citrus County, which is up on the coast, Gulf Coast, north of Tampa, St. Petersburg. That was a 52-43 county in its votes at the ballot for George W. Bush. Most likely absentees are slightly higher. Hendrie County, which is down near Lake Okeechobee, small county, that was 58% for Bush. And Hillsborough County, the big county among them, which is a county that includes Tampa, the suburb of Brandon, where George W. Bush appeared the other day. The precinct vote for that county in our tabulations here is 50-47 for George W. Bush over Al Gore. So it was likely that that percentage be exceeded by a Republican percentage. So I think this 1,800 vote margin probably will aggregate somewhat higher. It won't be enough to get it anywhere close to being out of the margin, which requires an automatic recount under the Florida law that we've been recounting. And that law is similar to that in many other states. When an election is so tight, there is an automatic recount. And so I would expect that recount would go forward, and if someone coming out speaking for the Gore campaign may just want to acknowledge that and express qualified congratulations to the opponent and a determination to await the outcome of the process.
I'm just wondering now, if it is all there, if all that's left are absentee ballots, then it seems reasonable to imagine that this lead might hold.
But I can just, it's such a small number that it is also just a question of pure error. I mean, we're now talking, if my math, there's 6 million votes in Florida. The Florida law says 0.5% margin, there should be an automatic recount unless the candidate asks that there not be one. That would be about 30,000 vote margin. To give you so that's a recount number. We're talking about a 2,000 vote margin. It's unbelievably small.
Could be a follow-up in 1 or 2 precincts.
Yeah, I mean, it would just take someone writing the numbers down backwards in a couple of precincts to flip this around, even if, so it's such a tiny margin that I wonder if there won't, I suspect they will go ahead and have a recount.
We now have Orlando Salinas telling us that 100% of the vote is in. Let's go to him and see what he has to tell us. Orlando?
Hi, Britt. Hi, Paula. You're right. That is exactly it. Right now, we have been visiting with the Division of Elections. There's a spokesperson there checking out their website. Here it is. 100% of the precincts all are in here in the state of Florida. The difference right now, 1,210 votes. The difference still in the Bush corner. Big news right now. We're still trying to break down exactly where those final precincts were coming in from. But right now, at 100% of the vote in the state of Florida, the difference is 1,210 votes in favor of Texas Governor George W. Bush.
Now, Orlando, does that include all absentee ballots that have so far been received?
That includes practically all of them. We still do believe that you may have a few stragglers.